Hello everyone, we meet again in The Trail of History. After exploring stories of hope, mystery, and greed, today we will dive into one of the darkest and most terrifying chapters in American history. This is not a story about monsters or demons. This is a story about a much more terrifying monster: fear. A story about how a community tore itself apart because of words whispered in the dark. Welcome to Salem, 1692. How much does it take for a community to come back to itself? For neighbors to denounce neighbors? Friends to denounce friends? And accusations based on invisible ghosts to send a person to the gallows? You might think that this only happens in fairy tales or horror movies, but in the cold winter of 1692, in a small, pious village in Massachusetts, that dream became real. This was not just a version. This was a purge, a hunt where no one knew who was the hunter and who was the witch. Hello everyone. To begin today's story, we must understand the atmosphere in Salem Village in the late 17th century. This was not a peaceful place. Life for the Puritans here was extremely settled. The winters were long and brutal. They lived in fear of the seasons, fear of attacks by Native American tribes, and above all, they feared the devil. For them, the devil was not a concept. Satan was a tangible being, always attentive to such moments. Salem Village was like a powder keg, filled with fear, suspicion, and fanaticism. It was just waiting for a trigger, and the fire broke out in January 1692, right in the house of Reverend Samuel Parris. His daughter, Betty Parris, 9, and his granddaughter, Abigail Williams, 11, suddenly began to exhibit strange behavior. We screamed, convulsed, twisted our bodies into unimaginable positions. Sometimes we heard sounds that were not human. Doctors were called in, but they could not find any physical cause. And when medicine was powerless, people would turn to the only answer they knew, the most terrifying answer: soaked by witches. The pressure was heavy on the two girls. People kept asking, "Who did this to you? Who sent the devil to torment you?" Finally, they were named, not the powerful, but three women on the margins of society, the most vulnerable. Tituba, the Parris family's slave, from the Caribbean, with different beliefs and stories. Sarah Good, a homeless, bigger woman. Sarah Osborne, a frail old woman who rarely went to church and was in a dispute over her property. The Salem witch hunt had officially begun, and its first feelings were on the most vulnerable. What turned a small investigation into a mass hysteria? The answer lies in Tituba's own pettiness. Under interrogation and perhaps torture, Tituba did more than confess. She spun a horrifying tale of signing the devil's book, of night meetings in the woods, and most importantly, she said, "There are others. There are witches in Salem too." Her confession added fuel to the fire. It confirmed everyone's ultimate fear. There was a devilish conspiracy going on in their midst. The hysteria was like an epidemic. The trials began, and here, a very absurd and dangerous legal concept was accepted. Ghost evidence, that is, the testimony of a victim that the ghost of the report was present and acted upon them, was considered valid evidence. How could you strengthen yourself against such an accusation? How could you prove that your ghost did not do it? This was a perfect trap. Anyone could be accused, and there was no way to defend themselves. The line of defense began to be seized. Rather than just talking about numbers, I want to tell you the stories of some of the victims, to remind us that they were flesh and blood people, with families and lives of their own. Bridget Bishop. She was the first to be hanged. Bridget was not like other Puritan women. She wore vibrant colors, owned a bottle of wine, and had a strong personality. She was a nonconformist, and that made her a target. Rebecca Nurse, a virtuous 71-year-old woman, respected by the entire community. When she was accused, 39 neighbors bravely signed a petition to protect her, but the hysteria was too great. Her story shows a terrifying truth. No one was safe. John Proctor, a respected farmer who publicly called the girls liars. He and his wife were immediately accused. He fought to the end, but was still convicted and hanged. His story is a warning of the dangers of speaking the truth to a frenzied mob. And Giles Corey. His story is perhaps the most tragic and powerful. The 81-year-old refused to answer guilty or not guilty in court because he knew that no matter what he answered, he would die, and his assets would be confiscated, leaving his sons with nothing. Under current law, the penalty for not answering was stone pressing. Heavy stones were placed on the powerful weapon for 2 days. His last words were, "More stones, more weight." He died bravely protecting the future of his family. The frenzy reached its peak. The prison was packed. 19 men were hanged on Gallows Hill. Giles Corey was stoned to death, and at least 5 others died in prison. Salem Village was plunged into the darkness of cavalry and death. What ended this dream? Gradually, some educated leaders began to doubt the ghost evidence. And when the criminals began to favor people of high status, even the director's wife, the authorities began to realize its absurdity. Their company also began to tire and fear. The storm gradually became replaced by anger. In October 1692, the special work was deciphered. Those who remained would gradually gain comfort. Years later, some judges and juries publicly apologized. The authorities overturned the verdicts and compensated the families of the victims. But those scars remained forever. Today, witch hunt has become a term for unjustified persecution, baseless accusations based on fear and mob mentality. From the McCarthy era to the storms in society today, the story of Salem is a province outside of time. It shows us how dangerous people can become when they believe they are doing God's will, and when fear is allowed to replace reason and truth. The people who died here were not witches. They were farmers, wives, mothers, husbands. They were victims of a time when the darkness of superstition hid the light of humanity. Thank you for watching a historical program with me.